we have been engaged in this fight against terrorism and counterinsurgency and a variety of things, principally in the Middle East, for 20, 25 years, maybe longer if you look back at some of the other things we're doing. And so that's really consumed us a lot, and it's really given the opportunity for China and for a resurgent Russia to kind of step up and in the void that has been created by us being so focused on that, to really begin to exert themselves. And so I think that's a part of it. I think there's also the simple fact is China has a plan, and they have a much more focused idea about where they want to go as a nation. They've assessed themselves. They've got a strategy in place. They've been using the strategy now for 15 years, and they're making progress on it. And they're driven largely by their economic objectives, and they are driven largely by the fact that they are not satisfied with the world order, the system of rules, and everything that have been put in place largely by the United States and the Western powers after the Second World War of operating in that environment. So they want to level up on that. They want to compete. They want to change it to where it's more favorable for them. I think they consider it to be very favorable for us. I think that begins to explain why we're in this situation with China. Russia, I think, is a different situation. Quite honestly, I think you've got a maniacal leader there whose principal motivation was the fall of the Soviet Union, and something that was almost inconceivable to him to take place. And so I think what you see is a lot of activity on his part and on the part of Russia to try to restore some of this greatness that of the Soviet Union, at least their perception of the greatness of the Soviet Union, and of the Russian fatherland. And so I think you see a lot of that is going in that direction. Again, we've been focused. We've been a little bit distracted with what we're doing. So it's given time and space for these two actors in particular to step up.
What's their end game, though? If you look at what they're, and let's take those. We'll go a little deeper on China and Russia for a second. What's the end game? I mean, because when they look at the world, I mean, where are they trying to get to, and what do you think that both of those leaders, what do you think their ideal world looks like?
Yeah, I think both of them have a different end state vision, but there is some overlap between the two of them. So I think if you start with President Xi, I mean, he is the China 2050 plan, this plan to make China great again, so-called here, and be prosperous, drive the economics of the world, be the one who sets the rule. I think that's what he is looking at. He is looking at this more through the lens of making China great, making China dominant, back to its historical position as the dominant country in the world, which you'd have to go back hundreds of years to see that, but that's the way they think. And I think, and I think, I'm not an expert on Chinese culture by any matter, but they take a long-term view, even if that long-term is centuries and centuries and centuries. And they view a lot of things that have happened at the hands of the United States and of the Western powers as being an affront to that and being designed to keep them down, so that the United States, the United Kingdom, other Western powers can exploit the areas that would more traditionally be under the influence of China. And I think in a word, they've had it, and they're trying to reassert themselves in terms of that. Putin has pretty much told us what he wants to do. He wants to eclipse the United States, and I actually think that he believes, and in fact, I think he has told us this in one of the letters or articles that he wrote here a couple of years ago, is that he would love to be in a position where he is dominant in Europe, and then the partnership between China and Russia would come together, and they would set the rules of the road for how the world operates on a day-to-day basis. So I think he views this as a more cooperative effort with China in the long run. I'm not sure that President Xi does. I don't know that as well, but I think Xi looks at it as Russia being more of a minor partner in the relationship. I think Putin looks at him as being two co-equal partners in this.
What do you make of the argument that's been made recently, and primarily it's being made by Robert Kennedy as he makes his bid for the presidency, that that Putin's incursion into Ukraine, his frustration with the West, is a byproduct of the expansion of NATO and the expansion of the UN into the Baltics and the periphery of what was the Soviet Union bloc states.
Well, I guess I could see how he would feel like that, but I was in a NATO assignment in the early 1990s. About the time we were extending NATO, we had this thing called Partnership for Peace. So you had all these countries, some of which are now NATO members, that were coming in as part of the Partnership for Peace program, where they weren't full partners, but we brought them in, we shared stuff, we were doing training with them, we were trying to address their military institutional challenges and things like that, trying to bring them more around to a more of a democratic look at things. It was a very, very popular program, and as I mentioned, a number of those countries actually used that as the stepping stone to become NATO members. I can remember going to NATO headquarters, at least the military headquarters in Mons, Belgium, and seeing Russian officers in the NATO. I mean, they were part of this. Yeah. They were there. So I think the intention of NATO, I think the intention of the United States was to kind of have a big tent here and to bring people in. I think there was a belief that the more we can be talking, the more we can be, doing things that are much more in a cooperative vein, that's good. And I think that idea is right. I think what changed is you had some changes in leadership in Russia. You think back to a guy like Yeltsin, who was in place, who has a generally a good relationship with our President Clinton at the time. It's kind of a different kind of guy. I mean, he actually stopped a coup in his own country. He has a different outlook. And then, of course, his hand-selected replacement is Putin. Now, whether he knew that or not, I don't know. I can't say that. But I think there's been a definite change in the leadership in Russia, and I think then you began to see the narrative that this has all been about us. We said we wouldn't do this. You did it anyways. You're encroaching on us. You're making us uncomfortable. We have to defend ourselves. And so I don't buy that was the original purpose. I understand how that now can be interpreted by a guy like Putin, but I don't think that was the original purpose. And that's my experience from being a NATO officer in the early 1990s.
Yeah, well, they do a good job of spinning narratives there and creating a perspective that they want you to hear. When we think about Iran, let's bring Iran into the picture for a minute.